You're ruining that child." My mother-in-law's voice struck me like a lightning bolt in our own living room. Some people just aren't cut out to be parents. 7 words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. Standing there in my own home, watching my 8-year-old son Lucas quietly playing with his tablet in the corner, I felt the world tilt on its axis. But what happened next, what Lucas had been secretly recording for months, would silence Patricia forever and reveal a truth that would change our lives completely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The moment those words left Patricia's lips, I felt like I'd been slapped. We were in our modest living room in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by the warm glow of afternoon sunlight streaming through our bay windows. The scent of fresh-baked cookies still lingered in the air from our weekend baking session, one of the many activities Patricia constantly criticized as unnecessary coddling. Lucas was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, appearing absorbed in his educational game. But I noticed how his shoulders had tensed at her words. Patricia Sullivan stood by our fireplace mantel, her perfectly manicured fingers trailing along the family photos displayed there. At 63, she commanded attention wherever she went. Silver hair always impeccably styled, designer clothes that whispered wealth and authority, and a smile that could cut glass when she disapproved, which was often, especially when it came to how my husband David and I were raising Lucas. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Part of me hoped I'd misheard, that maybe she'd said something else entirely. But the satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth told me otherwise. "I said you're ruining that child," Patricia repeated, turning to face me fully. "Look at him. 8 years old and you still baby him, still making excuses for every little thing. In my day, children had structure, discipline, respect for their elders. Not this permissive nonsense." I glanced at Lucas, who had gone completely still. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, were fixed on his tablet screen, but I could tell he was listening to every word. My heart ached for him. No child should have to hear themselves being discussed like they're some kind of failed experiment. "Patricia, I think there's been a misunderstanding," I began, trying to keep my voice level. "Lucas is a wonderful, intelligent, creative child. We're raising him with love and—" "Love?" She laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Love doesn't prepare children for the real world, Jennifer. Mark my words, you're setting that boy up for a lifetime of failure with all this emotional coddling." The room fell silent, except for the gentle ticking of our grandfather clock. Even the usual sounds from our neighbor's yard seemed muted. David was at work, pulling a double shift at the YE hospital where he worked as a pediatric nurse. He wouldn't be home for hours. Just me, Patricia, and Lucas in a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. This wasn't the first time Patricia had made comments about our parenting. It had started small, little remarks about how we were too lenient with bedtimes, too understanding when Lucas had meltdowns, too quick to praise him for things that should be expected, not celebrated. But over the past 6 months, her criticism had grown bolder, more frequent, more cutting. I'd always tried to brush it off, to keep the peace for David's sake. He'd lost his father 3 years ago, and Patricia was all the family he had left aside from us. But watching my son shrink further into himself with each harsh word, I felt something fierce rise up in my chest. "Patricia, I think it's time," I started to say when Lucas quietly stood up. "Grandma Patricia," he said, his voice small but clear. "I have something to show you." Both Patricia and I turned to look at him. He was holding his tablet, the same educational tablet Patricia constantly criticized as another screen to rot his brain. His face was pale, but there was something determined in his expression that reminded me so much of David when he'd made up his mind about something. "What is it, dear?" Patricia's voice took on that saccharine tone she always used with Lucas. Sweet, on the surface, but with an underlying edge of condescension. Lucas tapped on his screen a few times, then turned the tablet toward us. "I've been learning about digital recording in my computer class," he said quietly. "And I thought, maybe you'd like to hear something." A chill ran down my spine. I had no idea what Lucas was about to play, but something in his manner, the way he held himself, the determined set of his small jaw, told me this wasn't just another school project. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Well, go ahead then." Lucas pressed play. The sound that filled our living room was Patricia's own voice, crystal clear and unmistakably cruel. "That boy is never going to amount to anything with a mother like that. She coddles him like he's made of glass. If they lived with me, I'd fix him in a week." Patricia's face went white as the recording continued. It was from last month, when she'd been babysitting Lucas while David and I went to a parent-teacher conference. I remembered that day, how Patricia had insisted on watching him, how Lucas had been unusually quiet when we returned. The recording went on. His mother treats him like some precious little snowflake who can't handle reality. In my day, we toughened children up. We didn't validate every feeling or emotion. We taught them resilience through discipline, not through coddling. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But it was what came next that made my blood run cold. Lucas's small voice came through clearly. "But Grandma, Mommy says feelings are important. She says it's okay to be sad sometimes." Patricia's response was sharp and cruel. "Well, your mommy is wrong. Feelings are weaknesses, Lucas. The sooner you learn that, the better. Your grandfather became successful because he learned to ignore emotions and focus on what mattered. You're going to end up a failure if you keep listening to your mother's nonsense." The recording continued for several more minutes, each word cutting deeper than the last. Patricia telling Lucas that his drawings were meaningless scribbles, that his love of reading was too feminine for a boy, that his gentle nature meant he was destined to be picked on his whole life unless he toughened up. The absolute silence in our living room was deafening. The only sound was the ongoing recording of Patricia's voice, growing more venomous with each passing second. I felt sick to my stomach listening to the way she'd spoken to my son, our son, when she thought no one else would hear. Lucas looked between Patricia and me, his young face showing a maturity that broke my heart. "She says these things every time you and Daddy leave," he whispered. "I started recording because I thought maybe if you heard it, you'd understand why I don't like being alone with her anymore." Patricia's face had gone from white to a mottled red. Her hands were shaking as she reached out toward the tablet, as if she could somehow stop the words that had already been spoken. "Lucas, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Lucas said, and there was something in his voice that reminded me exactly why David and I had fallen in love with this incredible little person we were raising. "You say mean things about Mommy when she's not here. You tell me I'm going to be a failure. You tell me my feelings don't matter." The recording finally ended, leaving us in a silence that felt like a physical weight. Patricia stood frozen, her perfect composure completely shattered. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw not the fragile, oversensitive child Patricia had painted him as, but a brave, intelligent boy who had endured months of emotional cruelty and found a way to speak his truth. "How long?" I asked Lucas gently. "How long has this been going on?" "Since Grandpa Franklin's funeral," he said quietly. "Maybe a little after. She started saying things about how I was too emotional at the service, and then it just got worse." 3 years. 3 years of this. 3 years of my mother-in-law systematically undermining my child's confidence and security whenever we left him in her care. 3 years of her telling him he was weak for having feelings, deficient, for being sensitive, doomed to failure for being kind. I felt a rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not the quick flash of anger from a moment of frustration, but a deep, burning fury that someone I'd trusted, someone we'd welcomed into our home, included in our family decisions, respected, as David's mother, had been psychologically abusing my child. "Patricia," I said, my voice deadly calm, "I think you need to leave." "Jennifer, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I stood up, placing myself between her and Lucas. "You've spent 3 years telling my son that he's not enough, that his emotions are weaknesses, that he's going to fail because his parents love him unconditionally." "Children need structure. They need love," I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word. "They need support. They need adults who build them up, not tear them down. And they certainly don't need someone in their lives who uses every opportunity to poison them against their own parents." Lucas moved closer to me, not seeking protection, but offering support. I put my arm around his shoulders, feeling the tremor that ran through his small frame, not from fear, but from the relief of finally being believed, finally being heard. Patricia tried one more time. "You're making a mistake, Jennifer. That boy needs to learn that the world isn't going to coddle him the way you do." I looked at Lucas, at this brave, sensitive, intelligent child who had endured months of emotional abuse and found the courage to document it, to speak up, to show us the truth. Then I looked back at Patricia. "My son," I said clearly, "is not broken or deficient or weak. He's exactly who he's supposed to be, and anyone who tries to convince him otherwise has no place in his life." I walked to the front door and opened it. The late afternoon air rushed in, carrying with it the sound of children playing in the neighborhood, the distant hum of traffic, the ordinary sounds of a world where children were allowed to be vulnerable and loved for exactly who they were. "Get out," I said, "and don't come back until you can treat my son with the respect and kindness he deserves." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, to explain, to somehow justify what we'd all just heard. But even she couldn't spin this, couldn't make her cruelty sound like tough love. She gathered her purse and walked toward the door, each step stiff with wounded pride. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. "You're making a mistake, Jennifer. You'll regret this." "The only thing I regret," I replied, "is not listening to my instincts sooner." After she left, Lucas and I stood in our living room, holding each other. The house felt lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. But I knew this was just the beginning. There would be difficult conversations with David, decisions to make about future contact with Patricia, and most importantly, healing work to do with Lucas. "Mommy?" Lucas said against my shoulder. Was I right to record her? I pulled back to look at his face. This beautiful, brave face that had been told so many times it wasn't enough. "You were absolutely right, sweetheart. You protected yourself. The only way you knew how, and you were so brave to show me." He nodded, and I saw something in his eyes that gave me hope, a brightness that had been dimmed but not extinguished, a sense of self that Patricia had tried to crush but couldn't completely destroy. The sound of gravel in our driveway announced David's return. As his key turned in the lock, I squeezed Lucas's hand. We'd face this together, as a family, and we'd make sure that never again would anyone make this incredible child feel like he was anything less than perfect, just as he was. The door opened and David stepped inside, his face lighting up at the sight of us. "Hey there, my favorite people. How was your day?" Lucas and I exchanged a look. It had been a day that changed everything, a day when truth finally came to light, A day when a child's courage silenced his tormentor and showed us all what real strength looked like. It was eventful, I said, managing a smile. We have something to tell you. As we sat down together, David still in his scrubs, Lucas curled between us, me finally feeling like I could breathe again, I realized that sometimes the most important battles are fought by the smallest warriors. And sometimes, the truth really can set you free. David's face went through a spectrum of emotions as we played Patricia's recording. First came confusion, then disbelief, and finally, a white-hot anger I'd never seen in my gentle husband. His hands clenched into fists as his mother's voice filled our living room, each cruel word directed at our son hitting him like a physical blow. She said what? He whispered, his voice cracking. When the recording finished, he pulled Lucas onto his lap, holding him so tightly I worried he might hurt him. Buddy, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry you had to deal with this alone. Lucas nestled into his father's chest. It's okay, Daddy. I knew you'd believe me if I had proof. That night, after Lucas went to bed, David and I sat at our kitchen table with cups of tea growing cold between us. The warm yellow light from our pendant lamp cast gentle shadows across his face, but couldn't soften the pain etched in his features. How could I not see it? He asked for the 10th time. How could I miss that my own mother was hurting our son? I reached across the table and took his hand. Because she made sure you wouldn't see it. This was calculated, David. Deliberate. She waited until we were gone. The next few days blurred together in a haze of difficult conversations and revelations. David called in sick to work, something he'd never done in the 5 years I'd known him. We spent hours talking to Lucas, encouraging him to share everything Patricia had said and done. Each new detail felt like a dagger to the heart. She'd criticized his choice to play with dolls during a tea party phase, saying, "Boys don't play pretend like girls." She'd forbidden him from crying when he scraped his knee, telling him, "Men don't show weakness." She'd even gone through his room, removing books she deemed too emotional, and replacing them with what she called more appropriate reading for a future man. But as devastating as these revelations were, something beautiful began to emerge. Lucas started opening up in ways I hadn't seen in months. He talked about his feelings, his fears, his dreams. He drew pictures of our family, radiant, colorful drawings full of joy and love. It was as if removing Patricia's toxic influence had allowed his true nature to flourish again. On Thursday morning, David sat at our breakfast table staring at his phone. "She's been texting me all night," he said quietly. "She wants to talk." Lucas looked up from his cereal. "What does she say?" David's jaw tightened. "She says we're overreacting, that she was just trying to prepare you for the real world, that we're being too sensitive." I felt that familiar surge of anger, but before I could speak, Lucas surprised us both. "Daddy," he said, his voice clear and confident. "Do you think I'm too sensitive?" David looked at our son, really looked at him. Lucas's dark hair was sticking up in the back from sleep, and he had a milk mustache from his cereal. But his eyes held a strength and wisdom that took my breath away. "No, buddy," David said firmly. "I think you're exactly how you're supposed to be. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. It means you notice things other people miss. It means you care deeply about people and animals and stories. It means you have the courage to speak up when something's wrong, like you did with Grandma Patricia." Lucas smiled, the first genuine, full smile I'd seen from him in months. "Mrs. Campbell at school says sensitive people become the best artists and writers and doctors." "Mrs. Campbell is absolutely right," I added. "Some of the most important people in history were sensitive. They felt things deeply, and that's what made them great." That weekend, we made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. We were going to visit David's sister Emily in Seattle. Emily had been estranged from Patricia for over a decade, a decision we'd never fully understood. Now, we had a feeling we were about to learn why. The drive to Seattle was beautiful, with Lucas excitedly pointing out every mountain, river, and interesting cloud formation. David and I exchanged glances in the front seat, both nervous about what we might discover. Emily lived in a cozy house in the Fremont neighborhood with a garden bursting with flowers and vegetables. She greeted us at the door with tears in her eyes, something that immediately caught Lucas's attention. "Aunt Emily, why are you crying?" he asked, with characteristic directness. "Happy tears, sweetheart," she said, kneeling down to hug him. "I'm just so happy to finally meet you properly." Over dinner, as Lucas played with Emily's 2 cats in the living room, Emily and David talked quietly about their childhood. I listened, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. "She was always harder on you," Emily said to David, "but when Dad died, she got worse. Remember how she treated Sarah?" David nodded grimly. Sarah had been Emily's girlfriend, now wife of 15 years. Patricia had been viciously homophobic, eventually forcing Emily to choose between her love and her family. "I chose love," Emily said simply, "and I've never regretted it." Lucas wandered back into the kitchen. "Aunt Emily, were you sad when you stopped talking to Grandma Patricia?" Emily considered the question carefully. "I was sad for a while, Lucas. But you know what I learned? Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us don't know how to do it well, and it's okay to protect yourself from that." "Is that why Mommy and Daddy told her to leave?" "Yes, sweetheart. They were protecting you just like they should." That night, after Lucas fell asleep in the guest room, Emily shared more stories. About how Patricia had destroyed David's science fair project when he was 12 because she thought it was too nerdy. About how she'd refused to attend Emily's graduation because Emily had chosen to study art instead of business. About the way she'd systematically undermined both her children's confidence while disguising it as preparation for the real world. "She almost broke me," Emily admitted. "If it wasn't for Sarah, I might have believed all the things she said about me. That I was weak, selfish, destined for failure." David was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I thought I was protecting Lucas by maintaining the relationship. I thought he needed his grandmother." "He needs love and support," Emily replied. "He doesn't need someone who tears him down." Sunday morning, we sat in Emily's garden while Lucas helped her harvest tomatoes. Watching him laugh and chatter freely, seeing his confidence bloom in the space of just 2 days, reinforced everything we'd decided. "I'm going to call her," David announced. "I'm going to tell her exactly why she can't see Lucas anymore." "Are you sure?" I asked. He nodded, watching our son carefully examine a ladybug on a tomato plant. "Lucas deserves to know his parents will always protect him. And maybe Patricia needs to hear the truth about what she's done." The phone call happened that evening, after we'd returned home. David put it on speaker so I could hear, not to gang up on Patricia, but because we'd agreed to face this together as a united front. "David, finally," Patricia's voice came through the phone. "I've been waiting for you to come to your senses." "Mom, I need you to listen," David said, his voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. "I've heard the recording. We know what you've been saying to Lucas. That child is being raised like a precious snowflake." "That child," David interrupted, "is sensitive and kind and intelligent, and you've spent years trying to shame him for being exactly who he is." There was silence on the other end. "You called him a failure, Mom. You told him his emotions were weaknesses. You criticized everything about who he is as a person." "I was trying to help him." "You were hurting him," David said firmly. "Just like you hurt Emily. Just like you tried to hurt me." Patricia's voice rose. "Everything I did was to make you stronger." "No," David replied. Everything you did was about control, about making us into the people you thought we should be instead of loving us for who we are." Lucas appeared in the doorway, having heard voices. David gestured for him to come over, and Lucas climbed onto the couch beside us. "Lucas is here now, Mom," David said. "And I want you to know that my son, your grandson, is exactly the person he should be. He's compassionate and creative and brave. And if you can't see those as strengths, then you don't deserve to be part of his life." I watched Lucas's face as his father spoke these words. His eyes were bright, not with tears, but with a confidence that had been missing for so long. "You can contact us when you're ready to apologize," David continued. "Really apologize. To Lucas, for the things you said and the way you made him feel. Until then, you're not welcome in our home." He hung up the phone. Lucas looked between us. "Does this mean we won't see Grandma Patricia anymore?" "Not unless she changes," I explained. "Not unless she can love you exactly as you are." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "That's okay. I have people who love me just how I am." Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Without Patricia's negative influence constantly undermining his confidence, Lucas flourished in ways that amazed us daily. He started a neighborhood book club for kids, inspired by his love of reading. He began painting watercolor pictures of emotions, something he said helped him understand his feelings better. At school, his teacher noticed the change immediately. "Lucas seems so much more confident," Mrs. Campbell told us during a parent conference. "He's participating more in class, helping other children when they're upset. It's like he's found his voice." David and I started going to counseling, not because our marriage was in trouble, but because we wanted to learn how to support Lucas and break cycles of generational toxicity. Our therapist helped us understand that setting boundaries wasn't cruel, it was necessary. "You're teaching Lucas that he has the right to surround himself with people who build him up, not tear him down," she explained. "That's one of the most valuable lessons a child can learn." A month after the recording incident, Lucas came home from school with a project he'd been working on. It was a family tree, but instead of traditional branches, he'd drawn roots, deep, strong roots that anchored a tree with spreading branches full of leaves. "See?" he explained, showing us his work. "Aunt Emily and Uncle Sarah are here, and Mrs. Campbell is here because teachers are family too. And my friends Ben and Sophia. The roots are all the people who helped me grow." I noticed Patricia wasn't on the tree. "What about Grandma Patricia?" I asked gently. Lucas considered this. "Maybe she's a broken branch that we had to trim so the tree could stay healthy. In gardening, sometimes you have to remove parts that aren't growing right so the rest can flourish." The wisdom in his metaphor took my breath away. This 8-year-old had somehow found a way to understand and articulate something that adults often struggled with. That sometimes, removing toxic relationships is an act of love, not cruelty. That evening, we received an unexpected visit from David's Aunt Caroline, Patricia's sister, who lived across the country. She'd heard about our situation through the family grapevine and had driven 12 hours to see us. "I should have spoken up years ago," Caroline said, sitting in our living room with Lucas curled up beside her as she helped him with a puzzle. Patricia wasn't any easier on David and Emily when they were children. But back then, people didn't talk about emotional abuse. We just called it strict parenting. She looked at Lucas with such love and pride. "But this little one, he's shown more courage than any of us adults. Standing up to someone who was hurting him, that takes real strength." Lucas beamed under her praise. "My mom and dad say being brave isn't not being scared. It's doing the right thing even when you are scared." Caroline nodded approvingly. Smart parents, wise child. As the weeks turned into months, our new normal settled into place. Patricia had sent a few cards, not apologizing, but trying to downplay what had happened. We decided together as a family that those cards would go unanswered until she was ready to take real responsibility. Meanwhile, Lucas thrived. He joined the school drama club, where his sensitivity became a tremendous asset in understanding characters. He started a kindness campaign at school, teaching other children how to recognize and speak up about bullying. Most importantly, he continued to grow into himself, confident in his emotions, proud of his empathy, secure in the knowledge that his parents would always protect and support him. One evening, as I was tucking him into bed, Lucas said, "Mom, do you think Grandma Patricia will ever understand that I'm not broken?" I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I don't know, sweetheart. But what I do know is that you are perfect exactly as you are. And anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing an amazing person." He smiled sleepily. "I'm glad I made that recording." "Why's that?" "Because now you and Daddy know the truth, and the truth made us stronger as a family." As I turned off his light, I reflected on how Lucas had handled this entire situation with more grace and wisdom than most adults. He'd found a way to protect himself, speak his truth, and still maintain his essential kindness. He hadn't let Patricia's cruelty make him cruel in return. That night, David and I sat on our back porch, listening to the sounds of our neighborhood, settling into evening. The crickets chirped their nightly song, and a gentle breeze rustled through our maple tree. "Do you ever regret it?" David asked. "Setting that boundary with her?" I thought about Lucas's bright laugh at dinner, the way he'd helped a classmate who was struggling with math, his excitement about his upcoming art show at school. "Never," I said firmly. "We're raising a child who knows his worth, who understands that he doesn't have to accept mistreatment from anyone. That's the greatest gift we can give him." David nodded, taking my hand. "He's going to change the world, isn't he?" "I think he already has," I replied. "At least our little corner of it." The recording that had initially brought us pain had ultimately brought us transformation. It had forced us to confront uncomfortable truths, make difficult decisions, and fight for our child's well-being. But more than that, it had shown us the incredible strength and resilience of our son. Lucas had found his voice in the most challenging circumstances and used it to protect himself and educate us. He'd turned a painful situation into a lesson about boundaries, self-worth, and the true meaning of strength. And in doing so, he'd reminded us all that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. As we headed inside to check on our sleeping son, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for a child brave enough to speak his truth, a partner willing to stand up to his own mother, and a hard-learned lesson about the courage required to put love and protection above keeping the peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, our family was safe, united, and stronger than ever. And that was everything that mattered. 3 months passed before Patricia finally called. Not to apologize, but to inform us she was moving back to Portland and expected this nonsense to be over. She'd been living with her sister in Sacramento since our confrontation, but apparently even family members had grown tired of her toxic behavior. The call came on a Tuesday evening while we were having family game night. Lucas was building an elaborate card castle when David's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and his face grew serious. "It's her," he said quietly. Lucas looked up from his cards. "Are you going to answer?" After a moment's hesitation, David nodded. "Yes, but we're doing this together." He put the phone on speaker. Patricia's voice filled our living room, crisp and imperious as ever. "David, I'm calling to inform you that I'll be back in Portland next week. I've found an apartment near you, and I expect to resume normal visits with my grandson." The audacity took my breath away. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just an expectation that we'd welcome her back with open arms. "Mom," David began carefully, "we need to talk about what happened before you left." "What happened?" Patricia interrupted. was that you overreacted to some harmless comments. I was trying to toughen the boy up." Lucas set down his cards and walked over to us. Without saying a word, he climbed onto David's lap and took the phone. "Grandma Patricia?" he said, his voice calm and clear. "What you did wasn't harmless. You hurt my feelings. You told me I was weak for having emotions. You said I would be a failure like Mommy." Silence stretched across the line. "Lucas, sweetie, you misunderstood." "I didn't misunderstand," Lucas interrupted, showing a strength that made my heart swell with pride. "I recorded you, remember? I have your exact words. You called my drawings meaningless scribbles. You said my love of books was too feminine. You told me my sensitivity would make me a target for bullies." Patricia's breathing was audible through the phone, and when I cried at Grandpa Franklin's funeral, you said real men don't show weakness. But you know what? Men at Daddy's hospital cry sometimes when children get better. They cry because they care. And that's not weakness, that's love. I watched this brave little boy stand up to his grandmother with an eloquence that left me speechless. David's arms tightened around him protectively. "Furthermore," Lucas continued, using a word I wasn't even sure I knew at his age, "if you come back and you still think I need to change who I am, then I don't think we should see each other. I like who I am. My parents like who I am. My friends and teachers like who I am. The only person who doesn't is you." Another long silence. "Lucas," Patricia's voice was strained now, "I only wanted what was best for you." "No," he replied, firmly. "You wanted me to be who you thought I should be. But I'm not that person. I'm me. And if you can't love me for who I am, then maybe we shouldn't be family." With that, he handed the phone back to David. My husband looked at our son with such pride and amazement that it brought tears to my eyes. "Mom," David said, "Lucas has said everything I was going to say, but with more wisdom than I could have managed. He's 8 years old and he understands what you've refused to see. That true strength comes from being authentically yourself, not from hiding who you are." Patricia's voice, when it came, was different somehow, smaller. I need to think about this." "You do that," David said gently. "But Mom? He's right. If you can't love him exactly as he is, if you can't celebrate his sensitivity, his kindness, his emotional intelligence, then you have no place in his life. We won't let anyone diminish his light." The call ended. Lucas looked between us, searching our faces. "Did I do okay?" he asked. "You did more than okay," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You were incredible." 2 weeks later, we faced another test. Patricia did move back to Portland, and she began showing up. Not at our house, but at Lucas's school, his soccer practice, the library where he attended reading group. She never approached him directly, but she was there, watching, making her presence known. Lucas handled it with remarkable maturity. The first time he saw her at soccer practice, he came running to us during halftime. "She's here," he said simply. "How do you feel about that?" David asked. Lucas considered the question. "Sad, I think. Not scared anymore. Just sad that she doesn't understand yet." We reported her behavior to the school, who immediately implemented measures to prevent non-authorized family members from accessing school grounds. The soccer league did the same. Patricia was effectively barred from infiltrating Lucas's activities. But Lucas surprised us one day by asking, "Can I write her a letter?" "What would you say?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "I want to tell her how her words made me feel, and I want to explain why I'm not broken." That evening, Lucas sat at our kitchen table with a pencil and paper, carefully composing his thoughts. David and I watched in amazement as our 8-year-old poured his heart onto paper. "Dear Grandma Patricia," he wrote, "I'm writing this letter because I want you to understand something important. When you said mean things about me and Mommy, it hurt my heart. But it also made me think a lot about who I am. You think being sensitive is bad, but my teacher says sensitive people notice things others miss. Like how my friend Ben was sad about his parents' divorce even when he pretended to be okay. Because I'm sensitive, I could help him feel better. You said I'm too emotional, but Daddy says emotions are what make us human. When I see a sad movie, I cry because I care about the characters. When I see bullies being mean, I get angry because I want to help. These feelings aren't weaknesses. They're my superpowers. You said I would fail because Mommy and Daddy love me too much. But love doesn't make people weak. Love makes them brave. I was brave enough to record you because love taught me I deserve respect. I was brave enough to tell my parents what happened because love taught me they would protect me. I know you love me, Grandma, but the way you show love makes me feel small and wrong. Real love makes people feel big and right exactly as they are. If you can learn to love me the way I am, with my feelings and my drawings and my love of books, then maybe we can be a family again. But if you can't, that's okay too. I'll be happy and successful anyway, because I know who I am and I'm proud of that person. Love always, even when you're not nice. Lucas. We helped him mail the letter, though I wondered if it would make any difference. Patricia had spent decades viewing the world through a rigid lens of what people should be. Could an 8-year-old's words really change that? The answer came 3 weeks later, on a gray October morning. Patricia appeared at our door, not demanding entry, but asking if we could talk. She looked different. Older, maybe. Or perhaps just humbled. I got Lucas's letter, she said quietly. I've read it about 100 times. We invited her in, and she sat stiffly on our couch. Lucas was at school, which was probably for the best. I need to tell you about my father, Patricia began, surprising us both. My father was a hard man. He believed boys should be tough, unemotional. When David's father showed any sensitivity as a child, he was ridiculed, called weak, made to feel ashamed. She looked at her hands. I swore I'd never do that to my children. But somehow, somewhere along the way, I became him. I became the very person I'd hated. David leaned forward. Mom, let me finish, she said. I've been talking to a therapist, someone Caroline recommended, and I've realized that I've spent years trying to protect Lucas from a world that would hurt him for being soft. But in doing so, I became the very person who hurt him. Tears filled her eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd ever seen from Patricia. Lucas is right, she continued. His sensitivity isn't a weakness. His kindness isn't a flaw. His emotional intelligence isn't something to be fixed. I was trying to change him because I was afraid the world would break him. But I was the one trying to break him. She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn piece of paper, Lucas's letter, creased from multiple readings. He's 8 years old, and he understands love better than I do at 63, she whispered. He forgave me in this letter, even while setting boundaries. Do you know what kind of emotional maturity that takes? We sat in silence for a moment. I want to apologize, Patricia said finally. To Lucas first, but to all of you. I want to try to be the grandmother he deserves, but I don't know how. You start by accepting him exactly as he is, I said gently. His sensitivity is a gift. His emotions are valid. His kindness is strength. Patricia nodded slowly. Can I try? Can I start over? David looked at me, then back at his mother. It will take time. Trust isn't easily rebuilt. I know, she said. I'll wait as long as it takes. When Lucas came home from school that day, we told him about his grandmother's visit. He listened carefully, then sat quietly for a long time. I think people can change, he said finally, but they have to want to. and they have to do the work. "What do you think we should do?" David asked. Lucas considered this. "Maybe she could come to dinner, just her, and she could tell me about Grandpa Franklin when he was little. Maybe I could understand why she thought she needed to be so mean." The wisdom of this child never ceased to amaze me. A week later, Patricia came for dinner. She brought a photo album, pictures of David and Emily as children, stories about their father. But more importantly, she brought a genuine apology. "Lucas," she said, kneeling down to his eye level, "I was wrong. Everything I said to you was wrong. You are perfect exactly as you are. Your sensitivity is a superpower. Your emotions make you special. Your kindness will take you far in life." Lucas studied her face carefully. "Do you really believe that? Or are you just saying it?" Patricia's voice cracked. "I'm learning to believe it. And I promise to keep learning." Lucas nodded gravely, then surprised us all by reaching out and hugging her. "I forgive you, Grandma. But if you're mean to me again, I'll make another recording." Patricia laughed through her tears. "I hope you do. Keep me honest." The months that followed weren't easy. Rebuilding trust is a slow process, full of setbacks and small victories. Patricia attended therapy sessions and parenting classes. She learned about emotional validation and healthy communication. Most importantly, she began to see Lucas, really see him. She attended his art shows and cheered loudest for his creative projects. She learned to value his questions rather than dismiss them. She even started joining his reading group, discovering the books that had always been too emotional were actually profound and moving. One day, Lucas came home from a visit to Patricia's apartment, beaming with excitement. "Guess what Grandma Patricia said to me today?" he announced. "What?" I asked. "She said sensitivity is like having a superpower that lets you understand people's hearts. And she apologized for trying to take my superpower away." That Christmas, Patricia gave Lucas a special gift, a journal with a note inside. "For my sensitive, brilliant, wonderful grandson, may you always know that your emotions are a gift. Your kindness is strength, and your heart is exactly what this world needs." Lucas read the note aloud, then looked up at all of us gathered around our tree. "You know what's funny?" he said. "Grandma Patricia was trying to make me stronger by making me harder. But what really made me stronger was learning to be myself and having people who loved me for it." David and I exchanged glances. Our son had summarized months of therapy, family discussions, and hard-won wisdom in a single sentence. Later that evening, as we cleaned up wrapping paper, Patricia approached me in the kitchen. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For protecting him, for standing up to me, for showing me what love really looks like." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. We all want what's best for Lucas. "Yes," she agreed. "But you understood what that was." I didn't. As the evening drew to a close, I watched Lucas and Patricia looking through photo albums together. She was showing him pictures of David as a child, sensitive and kind, just like Lucas. "Your daddy used to cry at movies too," she told Lucas. "I used to think that was something to be ashamed of. Now I understand it was something to celebrate." Lucas nodded seriously. "Daddy still cries at movies. He says it means the story touched his heart." "He's right," Patricia said softly. "I wish I'd understood that sooner." Looking at them together, the grandmother learning to love without conditions and the grandson teaching her how, I felt a profound sense of hope. Change is possible at any age. Growth can happen, even after decades of destructive patterns. And sometimes, it takes a child's wisdom to show the adults how to love properly. The recording that had started this journey had been born of Lucas's pain and courage. But it had led to something beautiful, a family learning to accept and celebrate each member for who they truly are. Lucas's sensitivity wasn't something to be cured or hidden. It was a gift that had saved our family and taught us all what real strength looks like. As we said goodnight to Patricia and tucked Lucas into bed, he smiled up at us with that radiant, unguarded joy that had been missing for so long. "I'm proud of our family," he said. "We had a problem, and we fixed it together." "Yes," I agreed, kissing his forehead. "We did." And as I turned off his light, I marveled once again at this incredible child who had refused to let anyone dim his light, who had fought for his right to be exactly who he was, and who had shown us all what it meant to love courageously. The core recording had silenced his tormentor, but more importantly, it had amplified his voice, a voice that spoke of compassion, strength, and the transformative power of standing up for yourself. It was a voice the world needed to hear, and we would spend the rest of our lives making sure it was never silenced again. 2 years later, Lucas stood on the stage of Franklin Elementary's auditorium, looking out at an audience of children, parents, and teachers. The school had invited him to share his story as part of their annual Courage in Action assembly. At 10 years old, he had become an unofficial ambassador for emotional intelligence and standing up for oneself. "Hi, everyone," Lucas began, his voice clear and confident through the microphone. "2 years ago, I made a recording that changed my whole family. Today, I want to talk to you about why speaking up for yourself isn't just brave. It's necessary." I sat in the front row with David and Patricia, watching our son share his wisdom with other children who might be facing similar struggles. Patricia had tears in her eyes, happy tears this time. She squeezed my hand as Lucas continued. "Some of you might think being sensitive is a bad thing. I used to think that too, because someone told me it was. But being sensitive just means you feel things deeply. It means you notice when others are hurting and you want to help. It means you care." A little girl in the 2nd grade raised her hand. "But what if people make fun of you for crying?" Lucas smiled. "Then those people don't understand that tears are just feelings leaving your body. My dad always says tears are proof that you have a big heart. Would you rather have no heart at all?" The children giggled and shook their heads. What struck me most was how Lucas had transformed his painful experience into a mission to help others. After his speech, children lined up to talk to him. One shy boy whispered that his older brother called him a baby for being afraid of the dark. Lucas knelt down to the boy's level. "Fear is just your brain trying to keep you safe," Lucas explained. "But being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." Another child, a girl with pigtails, showed Lucas drawings she'd been hiding because someone told her they were too weird. Lucas examined each picture carefully. "These aren't weird. They're unique. And unique is what makes you special. The world would be pretty boring if we all did exactly the same things the same way." As I watched these interactions, I realized Lucas had become more than just a survivor of emotional abuse. He'd become a healer. His experience had given him tools to help other children navigate their own struggles. The transformation wasn't just in Lucas, though. David had started a support group for fathers dealing with toxic family dynamics. He met monthly with other dads who were trying to break generational cycles of emotional abuse. The hardest part, David shared with the group one evening, was realizing that setting boundaries with my own mother was actually an act of love. Love for my son, my wife, and ultimately, for her too. One father nodded vigorously. "I've been struggling with my father's criticism of how I raise my daughter. She's artistic and free-spirited, and he keeps saying I need to toughen her up." "My son taught me that toughness isn't about suppressing emotions," David replied. "It's about having the courage to feel deeply and still keep going. It's about standing up for yourself and others, even when it's difficult." Meanwhile, I had started writing, first in a journal, documenting our journey, then in a blog that unexpectedly gained a following among parents dealing with similar situations. My posts about emotional validation, Setting boundaries with toxic family members and raising emotionally intelligent children resonated with thousands of readers. One reader wrote, "Your story gave me permission to protect my child from my mother-in-law's constant criticism. I've been afraid of causing family drama, but you helped me realize that my child's well-being is more important than keeping them by peace." The ripple effects of Lucas's courage continued to expand in ways we never could have imagined. Patricia, meanwhile, had become an unexpected advocate for change. She started volunteering with a program that helped older adults develop healthier communication skills with their grandchildren. She often shared how her own journey of transformation had begun with an 8-year-old boy who refused to accept that his emotions were weaknesses. "I thought I was preparing him for a harsh world," she would tell the groups. "But I was part of that harshness. Children taught me that the world doesn't have to be harsh. We can choose to make it kinder." One evening, Patricia called with exciting news. "I've been accepted into a graduate program in child psychology," she announced. "At my age. But I want to understand child development properly. I want to help other grandparents learn what I had to learn the hard way." Lucas's reaction was pure joy. "That's amazing, Grandma. You're going to help so many kids." The next challenge came unexpectedly when Lucas started middle school. The transition to a larger school with older students tested everything he'd learned about standing up for himself. On the 3rd week of 6th grade, Lucas came home uncharacteristically quiet. After some gentle questioning, the story emerged. A group of 8th graders had been targeting him, calling him sensitive baby, and mocking his lunch drawings, something he'd done since kindergarten. "What do you want to do about it?" I asked, fighting every maternal instinct to march up to that school and handle it myself. Lucas thought carefully. "I want to try handling it myself first, with my words." The next day, instead of his usual drawings, Lucas brought a written note to lunch. When the bullies approached again, he stood up and read it aloud. "My name is Lucas Sullivan. When I was 8, someone tried to convince me that my emotions were weaknesses. They tried to make me ashamed of being sensitive. But I learned something important. The people who call others weak are usually the ones who are most afraid of their own feelings." The cafeteria had gone quiet. "So when you call me names because I draw or cry at movies or care about my friends' feelings, you're really just telling me that you're uncomfortable with emotions. And that's okay. Emotions can be scary if you don't understand them, but they're not my problem to fix." He sat back down and continued eating his lunch. The bullying stopped immediately. More importantly, Lucas became a beacon for other students, facing similar situations. Teachers began referring children to him when they needed peer support. The school counselor asked him to help design an anti-bullying program based on emotional intelligence. One of the most moving moments came during family therapy. Yes, Patricia had started attending family sessions to help rebuild trust and communication. The therapist had asked each of us to share what we'd learned from our journey. Lucas spoke last. "I learned that love isn't about making people into who you want them to be. Love is about celebrating who they are. And I learned that protecting yourself isn't mean, it's necessary." David nodded through tears. "I learned that I'd rather have my son trust me with his pain than suffer in silence. And I learned that some family traditions, like emotional suppression, are meant to be broken." I shared how Lucas had taught me that children are often wiser than adults about love and acceptance. He showed me that explaining your boundaries clearly is more powerful than just accepting mistreatment. Patricia took a shaky breath. "I learned that trying to prepare children for a cruel world by being cruel to them yourself is the worst kind of logic. I learned that sensitivity is a strength, not a weakness. And I learned that it's never too late to change, no matter how old you are." The therapist smiled. "What I see here is a family that was broken by secrets and healed by truth. Lucas, your recording didn't just capture harmful words. It created a catalyst for transformation. But perhaps the most extraordinary development came when Lucas started his own YouTube channel, Kids Talk Real Stuff. With our supervision and support, he began creating videos where children could share their experiences with standing up to bullies, dealing with family conflict, and celebrating their unique qualities. His first video, The Day I Stood Up to My Grandma, went viral. Comments poured in from children around the world who had faced similar situations. Parents shared how Lucas's courage had inspired them to have difficult conversations with their own families. One comment read, "My daughter showed me this video after my wife's father constantly criticized our son for liking to cook. We had a family meeting inspired by Lucas's bravery. My father-in-law is now my son's biggest cheerleader. Thank you for showing us that boundaries are acts of love." Another parent wrote, "Lucas, you helped me realize that protecting my sensitive child from my mother's constant toughening up attempts wasn't creating conflict. It was preventing my child from being damaged. Your family's story gave us permission to prioritize our child's emotional well-being." Lucas also started a pen pal program, connecting children who felt like outsiders in their families or schools. He would personally respond to emails from kids facing similar challenges, always ending with his signature phrase, "Remember, different isn't wrong, it's wonderful." One letter particularly moved us all. A 12-year-old from another state wrote, "Dear Lucas, my stepdad always tells me boys shouldn't be emotional. He says I'm too soft and will never make it in the real world. Your video made me realize that being emotional doesn't make me weak, it makes me human. I'm going to start keeping a journal like you suggested. Thank you for helping me see that. My feelings matter." Lucas wrote back immediately, "Your feelings absolutely matter. Being human means feeling things. Your stepdad probably learned that emotions were dangerous when he was young, but that doesn't make it true. You keep being exactly who you are. The world needs more people who feel deeply and care greatly." As Lucas's platform grew, we were contacted by child psychology professors who wanted to study his impact. One researcher from Stanford called his approach revolutionary in its simplicity. Children connecting with other children about emotional resilience, boundaries, and self-advocacy. It's brilliant, she explained. Lucas speaks in a language children understand without the clinical detachment of adult advice. But Lucas remained remarkably humble about his influence. When a reporter asked him if he felt like a child activist, he replied, "I'm just a kid who learned that speaking up for yourself can change everything. If that helps other kids speak up too, then I'm happy." The most profound moment came on. The second anniversary of the recording incident, as Lucas had dubbed it. We decided to have a family reflection evening, sharing how our lives had changed. David spoke about how becoming his son's protector had made him a better father, nurse, and man. Lucas taught me that true strength is vulnerability. My patients have noticed I'm more emotionally present with their families now. I shared how advocating for Lucas had given me my own voice. I'd always been afraid of confrontation, but fighting for my child taught me that some things are worth fighting for. It's changed how I show up in every area of my life. Patricia's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. 2 years ago, I thought love meant control. I thought preparing children for harshness required harshness. Lucas taught me that love means acceptance, and the best way to prepare children for the world is to show them they're worthy of love exactly as they are. But it was Lucas's reflection that brought us all to tears. "You know what I learned?" he said, now almost 11 and wise beyond his years. "I learned that one person speaking their truth can create a tsunami of change, not just in their own family, but in families they'll never meet." He paused, then continued. "I also learned that trauma can become transformation if you're brave enough to talk about it. My recording wasn't just evidence of what happened. It became a bridge to what could be. Looking at our son, confident, empathetic, strong in his sensitivity, I marveled at the journey we'd all taken. What had started as a moment of cruelty had become a lesson in courage. What had begun as a fracture in our family had become the foundation for a stronger, more authentic relationship. Lucas had shown us all that children are not projects to be fixed but individuals to be celebrated. He demonstrated that emotional intelligence is a superpower, that boundaries are acts of love, and that the truth, however painful initially, really can set you free. As we tucked him into bed that night, Lucas made one final observation. "Mom, Dad, I think the most important thing I learned is that you can't change people who don't want to change, but you can always change how you respond to them. And sometimes, that's enough to save yourself." With those words, our remarkable boy had summarized years of therapy, family healing, and personal growth. He'd taken the hardest lesson of his young life and distilled it into wisdom that adults struggle to understand. The recording had silenced Patricia's cruelty, but more importantly, it had amplified Lucas's voice. A voice that would continue to speak truth, advocate for emotional wellness, and show the world that sensitivity is indeed a superpower. As David and I sat on our porch that night, reflecting on our journey, I realized that Lucas's story was just beginning. He had already touched so many lives, changed so many perspectives, inspired so many families to have difficult but necessary conversations. "He's going to change the world, isn't he?" David said, echoing words from years before. I smiled, thinking of all the children Lucas had already helped, all the families who had found courage through his example. "I think he already is." And somewhere in his room, surrounded by drawings from young pen pals around the world, Lucas slept peacefully, a child who had transformed his pain into purpose, his vulnerability into strength, and his voice into a beacon of hope for others facing similar struggles. The recording that had captured cruelty had become the foundation for something beautiful. A family healed, a grandmother transformed, and a child empowered to help others find their voices too. It was perhaps the most powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths, and that speaking up for yourself isn't just an act of self-preservation, it's an act of love for all those who will come after you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. 5 years after the recording, Lucas Sullivan stood before the United Nations Youth Climate Summit, addressing delegates from around the world. Now 14, he'd been invited to speak not about environmental issues, but about emotional resilience and the power of authentic communication. "When I was 8, Lucas began, his voice confident and clear through the UN microphones, "I made a recording that changed my life. But today, I want to talk about something bigger. How one moment of speaking your truth can ripple outward and touch lives in ways you never imagined." The assembly hall was packed with youth activists, diplomats, and educators from dozens of countries. Patricia sat in the front row, now holding a doctorate in child psychology at 68. She wore a pin Lucas had designed that read, "Sensitivity is strength" in multiple languages. David and I watched from the balcony as our son continued his address. He'd grown tall and confident, but retained that essential kindness that had always defined him. "Many of you are here because you care deeply about our planet's future," Lucas continued. That caring, that emotional connection to something bigger than ourselves, is exactly what I want to talk about. 5 years ago, someone tried to convince me that caring too much was a weakness, that feeling things deeply would make me fail. He paused, scanning the audience. They were wrong. And here's why that matters to all of you. What followed was a masterclass in connecting personal story to universal truth. Lucas spoke about how emotional intelligence had become his greatest asset, how his childhood trauma had taught him to advocate not just for himself, but for others who felt voiceless. The same sensitivity that was once criticized as a flaw, he explained, is what allows me to understand the pain of a melting glacier, the distress of displaced communities, the urgency in a polar bear's struggle. Your emotions aren't obstacles to activism, they're the fuel. After his speech, delegates surrounded Lucas. A teenage climate activist from Bangladesh spoke tearfully about facing ridicule for her emotional responses to environmental destruction. Lucas listened intently before responding. "Your tears aren't weakness," he assured her. "They're proof that you understand the gravity of what we're facing. Use that emotional truth to help others understand too." A delegate from Germany, father of 2 young children, approached next. "My son is very sensitive like you were. How do I protect him from those who would dim his light?" Lucas smiled. "You don't protect him from the world, you teach him to change it. Show him his sensitivity is a superpower. Let him know that the world doesn't need another person who feels nothing. It needs people who feel everything." Back home in Portland, Lucas's influence had continued to expand far beyond our wildest imaginings. His Kids Talk Real Stuff platform had evolved into a global movement. Schools across 5 continents now incorporated his emotional intelligence curriculum into their programs. The curriculum wasn't just theory, it was built on real experiences from children who'd faced emotional challenges and found healthy ways to address them. Lucas had collected hundreds of stories, always with permission, creating a resource that spoke to kids in their own language. One particularly powerful case study came from Japan, where a young student used Lucas's recording technique to address academic pressure from controlling parents. The child's documentation led to family counseling and a complete transformation in their household dynamics. "What Lucas taught us," the father wrote in a testimonial, "is that children's voices matter. When we really listen to them, truly hear them, we often find wisdom we didn't know we needed." But perhaps the most significant development was Lucas's collaboration with Patricia on a research study about generational healing. Together, they interviewed families who had broken cycles of emotional abuse, documenting the factors that led to successful transformation. "What we discovered," Patricia explained during a conference presentation, "is that change often begins with the youngest voices. Children like Lucas, who refuse to accept toxic patterns as just the way things are, become catalysts for family-wide healing." Their research had led to the creation of the Golden Bridge Method, a therapeutic approach that used children's authentic communication to help families rebuild trust and connection. The method was being piloted in therapy centers across 3 countries. One particularly moving story emerged from the research. A family in rural Montana had been struggling with generational patterns of emotional suppression. The father, a rancher, had been raised to believe emotions were weakness, a belief he'd passed to his son. When his 8-year-old grandson showed Lucas's video to the family, it sparked a conversation that changed everything. The grandfather, moved by Lucas's story, started attending therapy for the first time at 73. "If that boy could stand up to his grandmother," the grandfather had said, "I reckon I can learn to show my feelings to my family." Within a year, 3 generations of that family had learned to communicate openly about emotions. The grandson, once withdrawn and anxious, had become a leader in his school's anti-bullying program. Lucas received a video call from the family, showing him how his courage had rippled through their lives. "You helped us save our family," the father said, his voice thick with emotion. "My son doesn't have to grow up believing that feelings are dangerous." These stories weren't unique. Lucas's inbox was filled with similar accounts from families around the world. Each story reinforced the same truth. When children are empowered to speak their truth, healing can reach backwards through generations and forward into the future. On Lucas's 14th birthday, we received an unexpected gift. The White House had invited him to participate in a special initiative on youth mental health. The First Lady's office had reached out personally, expressing how Lucas's story had inspired national policy conversations about emotional wellness in schools. "Lucas," the aide explained during our video call, "your message about emotional intelligence as strength has resonated deeply with our administration. We'd like you to help design a national program for supporting emotionally sensitive children." Lucas listened carefully before responding. "I'd be honored, but I have one condition. Any program needs to include grandparents and older family members. Change can't just happen in one generation. It needs to heal across all generations." The aide smiled. "That's exactly why we need your voice in this conversation." The White House visit became a turning point. Lucas spoke with senators, education officials, and policymakers about the importance of validating children's emotions rather than suppressing them. His presentation included data from Patricia's research, showing how family healing could reduce long-term mental health issues. One senator, initially skeptical about emotional intelligence initiatives, changed his tune after hearing Lucas speak. "If a 14-year-old can articulate these concepts so clearly," he said, "maybe we adults need to listen better." During the visit, Lucas also met with other young advocates. Among them was Maria, a 13-year-old from Texas who had used Lucas's techniques to address religious trauma in her family. "Your story gave me courage," she told Lucas. "I recorded conversations where my parents said terrible things about my anxiety, calling it a lack of faith. When I played it back, they finally heard how their words affected me." Lucas hugged her tightly. "That's exactly why we share our stories, so others know they're not alone." The White House initiative launched 6 months later as the Emotional Wellness in Schools program. Lucas served as a youth advisor, helping design age-appropriate curricula that emphasized emotional intelligence as a core life skill. The program included training for teachers, resources for parents, and, at Lucas's insistence, special workshops for grandparents and extended family members. Patricia led many of these sessions, sharing her own transformation story. "I was 63 when my grandson taught me that love doesn't mean controlling someone's emotions," she would tell the groups. "If I can learn to celebrate sensitivity instead of suppressing it, anyone can." Meanwhile, David had been promoted to head pediatric nurse at his hospital, partly due to his increased emotional intelligence in patient care. He'd started a support group for medical professionals dealing with family trauma, helping them break cycles of emotional suppression in their own homes. "Lucas taught me that my sensitivity as a father made me a better nurse," David explained to the group. "When I stopped seeing emotions as weaknesses, I could be more present with grieving families, more supportive of anxious children. I had published a book about our journey, titled When Children Lead: Lessons in Courage from the Next Generation." The book became a bestseller, but more importantly, it sparked conversations in countless families about emotional validation and healthy boundaries. Book clubs around the world read our story and organized family discussions about communication patterns. Many readers shared how our experience had given them permission to address long-standing toxic dynamics in their own families. One reader's review particularly moved us. "This book saved my relationship with my mother." Like Patricia, she had been critical of my overly sensitive daughter. "After reading Lucas's story, we had the hardest conversation of our lives. Now my daughter has a grandmother who celebrates her emotions instead of shaming them." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The International Children's Peace Prize Committee nominated Lucas for their award, citing his role in advancing children's rights to emotional expression and family healing. Though he didn't win, the nomination brought global attention to emotional wellness as a human rights issue. Lucas used the platform to launch the One Voice, Many Healed campaign, encouraging children worldwide to document and address emotional abuse in their families. The campaign used a simple hashtag, My Voice Matters, and quickly spread across social media. Children from dozens of countries shared videos about standing up to family members who dismissed their emotions. A 9-year-old from Iceland posted about confronting her uncle's ridicule of her crying at movies. A 12-year-old from Nigeria shared how he'd addressed his grandmother's criticism of his love for poetry. Each story added to a growing chorus of young voices demanding emotional respect. What children are teaching us through this campaign, Lucas explained in a CNN interview, is that emotional abuse is often normalized within families. But just because something is common doesn't make it acceptable. The movement had real impact. UNICEF incorporated emotional wellness into their child protection framework. The World Health Organization updated their guidelines on child mental health to emphasize the importance of family emotional dynamics. On the 5th anniversary of his original recording, Lucas organized a global event called 5 Years, Infinite Voices. Children who had been inspired by his story shared their own journeys of standing up to emotional invalidation. The event, broadcast live from Portland with satellite connections to dozens of countries, became a celebration of child resilience and family transformation. Patricia served as one of the moderators, her presence symbolizing how dramatically attitudes could change. 5 years ago, Patricia said during the broadcast, I thought protecting my grandson meant hardening him. I was wrong. These children are showing us that protection comes through acceptance, strength comes through sensitivity, and change comes through courage. Story after story poured in. A family in Sweden had completely transformed after their autistic daughter used Lucas's methods to address sensory shaming. A household in Kenya had healed 3 generations of emotional trauma after their youngest son documented harmful toughening up practices. Each story reinforced the same truth. Children's voices, when truly heard, could heal wounds that had festered for decades. But the most powerful moment came when Aisha, a 14-year-old from Borda, Egypt, shared her video message. She spoke in Arabic with English subtitles, describing how Lucas's story had inspired her to address honor-based emotional suppression in her family. In my culture, boys are taught not to cry. Girls are taught not to be angry, she explained. But Lucas taught me that emotions are not cultural, they are human. When I showed my family his recording, my grandfather wept. He said he had spent 70 years trying not to feel. Now we cry together, and we are stronger. Lucas watched with tears streaming down his face. This is why we speak up, he said softly. Not just for ourselves, but for every child who comes after us. As the global event concluded, Lucas made an announcement that surprised everyone, including us. He had been accepted to a special program that would allow him to graduate high school early and begin studying child psychology and international relations at age 16. I want to study how children's voices can be better heard in policy making, he explained. Not just in America, but globally. Every child deserves to have their emotions validated, regardless of where they're born. The program, a collaboration between several universities, would allow Lucas to continue his advocacy work while pursuing dual degrees. His thesis proposal was already taking shape. Emotional Intelligence as Foundation for Global Peace. How Children's Voices Can Transform Societies. Patricia beamed with pride. From the grandmother who tried to silence him to his biggest academic supporter, she joked. If that's not proof that people can change, I don't know what is. That evening, as our extended family gathered, Emily and Sarah visiting from Seattle, Caroline from across the country, we reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple recording. Do you remember, David asked Lucas, what you said that first day after you played the recording? About how the truth made us stronger as a family? Lucas nodded, now almost as tall as his father. I said the truth made us stronger, but I think I understand it differently now. The truth didn't just make us stronger, it made us real. And being real is what allowed us to help so many others become real too. As we sat around our dinner table, the same table where Lucas had written his letter to Patricia, where we'd had countless family meetings, where we'd celebrated each other's Growth, I felt overwhelming gratitude. A recording meant to capture cruelty had captured so much more. It had captured the moment a child refused to accept that his authentic self was wrong. It had captured the beginning of a family's healing. It had captured the seed of a global movement. But most importantly, it had captured proof that children's voices, when truly heard and valued, can change the world. Lucas's story was no longer just ours. It belonged to every family struggling with generational patterns of emotional suppression. It belonged to every child who had ever been told their feelings were too much. It belonged to every adult ready to embrace the radical idea that sensitivity is strength. As we cleared the dinner table together, Lucas paused and smiled at us. "You know what I've learned after all these years?" "What's that?" I asked. "The recording might have silenced Grandma Patricia's cruelty," he said, glancing at her with obvious love. "But it amplified something much more important. It amplified the truth that every child deserves to be heard, felt, and celebrated exactly as they are." Patricia stepped forward and hugged him tightly. "And that truth," she said, her voice full of emotion, "is the legacy you're leaving for the next generation." Looking at them together, the grandmother who had learned to love unconditionally, and the grandson who had taught her how, I knew that healing wasn't just possible. It was inevitable when we're brave enough to speak our truth and wise enough to listen when others speak theirs. The recording had ended Patricia's harmful words, but the love that followed had started a conversation that would echo through generations, reminding the world that every child's voice matters, every emotion is valid, and every family can choose healing over harm.